I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that reduces the risk and costs of cross-border transactions. As a board member, there are few better feelings than making a suggestion which adds quick material value to your organisation. I remember when one of our board members saved us $50,000 with a quick introduction to a group discount scheme for one of our key suppliers. I continue to feel grateful to this day. Alt21 can offer exactly this kind of quick win for board members. By using their foreign exchange and hedging services, you could reduce your company's costs by 90%. For a company that has just 10 million foreign exchange exposure through its revenues or cost base, that could be over 300,000 back into the business. Alt21 are so confident that they offer the best value in the market. They show you how much they make from fees in real time before and after any transaction. If you want to save your organisation money on its foreign exchange and hedging, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Neural. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Neural, board search specialist and market leader, bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Eamon Devlin, is adjunct professor and associate fellow at the Saïd Business School, University of Oxford, focusing on sport, finance, private equity and leadership courses. Eamon is the founder of Minute 9, where he advises elite sports teams on communication, and a PhD researcher at the Leeds Beckett School of Sport, where he studies half-times in elite sport. Formerly, he co-founded MJ Hudson, a private equity law firm which listed on the London Stock Exchange in 2019 with a market cap of £97.6 million. Eamon, a huge welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Oliver. Looking forward to this.
I came across your work on half-time team talks in elite sports, which on some levels is quite niche, but as I read on, it struck me that there are potentially some really interesting lessons there for board members to think about, because in some ways, to my mind at least, board members are responsible for giving the equivalent of halftime team talks to their executive. You've worked on boards. Does that thinking resonate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, whenever people ask me that question, they always sort of jump to, the halftime team talk and what the coach says. But we've identified frankly elements which are more important at halftime than what the words that the coach speaks. So for example, we look at who is in the changing room at halftime. So there are some very well-known football clubs, which listeners will have heard of, where the changing room is absolutely full of people. So extreme examples are we've had shareholders in the dressing room, we've had presidents, chair people, the entire board of directors, some person getting a jersey sign, from Nike. You've got bankers. One club was in administration, so the bankers were in there one day at halftime. And so to give the players a chance to understand what's happening, one of our recommendations is clearing out the dressing room. So it's scaled back to just those who need to be in that room. And the analogy I'd say with board of directors is you've got boards as a trend. I think the numbers are getting larger, but you've got lots of observers as well. And so you may have 15, 20, 25 people in the room, maybe 7 or 8 are observing. But those observers are also communicating. Even though they may not be saying anything, they're still communicating. I mean, words are only, depending on what scale you use, maybe 7-8% of communication. So I think that's the analogy, which is who needs to be in the room and why. And the fewer people, the better, generally speaking.
Yeah, I see that particularly in the sort of VC-backed and PE-backed world, where investors will often ask for an observer seat and say, don't worry, we're not going to get involved, but we just want to be in the room. And I always say to CEOs, founders, if you've ever had an argument or a heated discussion with someone with no one in the room, it's a very different experience when you have a heated discussion with others in the room, because suddenly saving face becomes an issue at play. And I think people often underestimate that impact of a silent person doing quote unquote nothing.
Yeah, because humans aren't neutral, right? The people there with their eyes, right? So they're still visible to the person, all the others. The other, just when you're speaking, it reminds me of not a formal board of directors, but there's something, I'm sure you're familiar with, something called an LPAC, it's the Limited Partner Advisory Committee. So that's the advisory committee, if you like, of the limited partners, private equity or venture capital fund. And those two have increased in number of bodies over the last 10, 15 years, to the point where at one stage it was very senior people who went from the VC to be on the LPAC committee to now becoming people who are much less senior, and you're less able to make a decision.
So how do you think about who should be present at Team Talk? And for a board member listening to this thinking, gosh, who've we got in the room? How do we think about that?
Well, in a sporting context, people can make things complicated, can't they? Including myself a bit of time, but like, what is halftime? Using the football analogy, people think the game of football is 90 minutes. It's not 90 minutes. It's 105 minutes because there's always a halftime and there's always a 15-minute break. So the minimum time the game expands for is at least 105 minutes. The purpose of halftime really is for the players to catch their breath, is to get food, to get water, to be with each other, come back to earth, to land, to be present, and then maybe to take on board some tactical decisions. So the purpose is trying to get those 11 players in a better state of mind and frame of mind mentally and physically to put in a better performance in the second half. So therefore, anybody who's not a player needs to be helping those players make that objective. Otherwise, they shouldn't be in the room. And the challenge that sports teams have, Oliver, is that people want to be in the room at halftime. I mean, it's the most probably privileged room to be in the whole stadium because there's no cameras in there, and there can be some dramas and some. To be frank, we've seen all sorts in the last year. So I think things working out what the purpose is, and then having people feed into that purpose. So in a company context, presumably it's people on the board, if you're looking at the strategy of the business, then who can really analyze and help advise, make better, amend that strategy of the company. If a person not able to do that, haven't got the right skill, then I would argue that they shouldn't be in the room discussing it.
So it's really being ruthless and disciplined about what's the minimum viable group of people that we need in this room to deliver on our goals as a board. So if we are looking to limit the number of people in the room, are there approaches you found particularly effective for getting external voices into the discussion without negatively affecting the dynamic in the room? I'm thinking in board meetings, you often have people come in, do a particular presentation, and then leave afterwards. I'm wondering if there's a sort of parallel in the halftime team talk and whether there's anything you've learned on how best to do that might be relevant for boards.
The parallel I can draw is I've learned this the hard way with our business, which is unless somebody realizes that there's a problem, then they're not going to listen. And so if you have an expert come in, then having it very clear with the other cohort in your group to look at, guys, do we all agree there's a problem here? And if so, can we write down on a piece of paper what the problem is? Okay, let's agree that it's these two issues. Who do we think can help us with these two or one problem? So I think there's an educational journey to go in. What often happens is people just assume that everybody else realizes there's a problem, but we're all not on the same page. And suddenly this stranger appears out of nowhere and go, who's this guy? So I think there's a warming up exercise to do to get people. And so before we take a mandate on, we always try to agree with the head coach. What's the problem we're trying to fix? And if we can't agree what that is, then there's not much point in getting involved because we're never going to be able to measure success or otherwise because, having it. So give you an example of, we had a mandate, actually, which we turned down recently, which is a football manager in England. And the mandate was our players don't like playing at home anymore because the crowd gets on their back. So the problem is very clear, but we thought, well, we haven't got the right skill set because I don't know what the answer to that question is. But it was still an interesting exercise to go through. That was the problem we're trying to fix. And we rejected it because we didn't think we had the right team or skill set. But I think going and writing down what the problem is and then getting somebody in to kind of help with that problem, I think that's a worthwhile exercise.
You touched earlier on your insights around mixed purposes in halftime team talks, this clash between how all the players want to do is rest and all the manager wants to do is to impart their wisdom. And it strikes me there's a huge parallel there with some of the insights from Roger Martin, the past podcast guest, who talked about why board strategy offsites often fail because the board members, or the executive, spend a whole load of time preparing for these board meetings, and all they want when they come to that board meeting, having done all this work, is a gold star and a pat on the back, being told you've done a great job. And the board members come to that meeting thinking, gosh, I better add some value. And so all they want to do is to find something that's not right and that they can improve on. And so as a result, the exec get really irritated that they don't get the gold star and they don't listen to the non-execs. And the non-execs get really upset because they're trying to add value and they can't add value because the execs aren't listening. How What lessons can sort of boards learn from aligning purpose in a half-time team talk?
I think people take time to land in a conversation and actually arrive in a room. I think it's different. Like when you walk through the doors into a room, that's not arriving. You've got to the destination. Because you may have fought very hard on the tube to get to the meeting. You may have had some argument with some guy at the traffic lights, or your bike's being stolen. So we would often, before the first person speaks, the head coach would say, like, are the players ready to listen? And no, I think any person can just take a second, look around the room, 5-6 second, gap before you start speaking, and then start, but too often people just say, well, okay, it's 4:00 now, we're going to start talking because we're time precious here and we're really functional business, we all start on time. But I think that's something which people may be present, but have they arrived? Because if they haven't arrived, they're not going to listen.
Reminds me of some of my discussions with my kids where I've learned the hard way that if they're not in a sort of emotionally calm state, there is no point telling them anything. And actually it's really helped me think about the way that I engage in meetings. And of course, as adults, we've got better at hiding those emotions, but I think they're still there, that if you're in that fight or flight mode, you're just not going to engage. It doesn't matter that the person's 100% right.
Yeah, and also, like, to give you that, like, I know, like Bayern Munich, I know when Arsenal do this, they have lots of team meetings, right? But those two teams generally have to play a little game before the formal stuff, before the PowerPoint gets revealed. It could be someone tells a joke. It could be the little sort of a bucket with a ball. Some people try to get a ball into a bucket. But what it does is people's shoulders go down, they relax a bit, the armor comes down a little bit, and, people usually perform better in that situation. More likely to remember, the eye movement sort of gets less erratic, they're less fidgety. And that's all the time people are like, well, we don't do that because we're really serious. We've got this, we've got a long agenda to get through, and that's all great. But if the people you want to engage with are not ready for that, then you're probably going to waste a lot of their time as well, and your own time, and your own credibility. What was Eamon on about today? I have no idea.
It's something I do actually in all our senior leadership team meetings. At the start of the meeting, we have what we call a seg, where I get everybody to share the achievements of the last 2 weeks that they're most proud about in their personal and professional lives, and then to traffic light their mood, red, amber, green.
Okay.
So, they come in and say, I'm red because I didn't sleep last night because, my kids kept me up all night or whatever. And I recently had some of our advisory board members come in and observe one of our leadership team meetings, and I made them participate in this bit, and they felt deeply uncomfortable. But actually at the end of it, they were like, wow, that was really powerful. And actually one of them, who's a CEO, took that back, I think, into their own meetings, having experienced it.
Yeah, and what you're doing there, of course, is in a little bit like, first of all, well done for doing that, I would say, but bravery for doing that.
I got laughed at a lot the first time.
And I bet now if you try to stop it, you get it stopped. So, as ever with something new, easy thing to do is laugh, isn't it? Just joke at it, because it hasn't done before. But what I think what you're trying to do there is help people land psychologically, but also trying to start some stories, try to tell their own story, which can be, as you know, incredibly powerful. So, as you know, I'm sure you know, you don't really trade in numbers. Our brains are not really wired to remember numbers. Almost there are exceptions to that rule, but stories do something amazing to our neurons, to our ability to remember. I mean, it just transforms isolated letters and words into streams of information, which our brains just finds it much more easy to remember and also be comfortable with. And so I've noticed the really elite coaches in football are amazing storytellers. They make stories about anything. The way they distill information is all through the gift of theming and storytelling.
Well, let's come to talk about that for a second. The other thing, actually, it reminded me that we do that, certainly generates some sort of uncomfortable giggles the first time people experience it. For our all hands meetings, we get everybody to meditate for the first minute. We have someone lead a meditation. It always makes me laugh when we have the new joiners in the room, and you can sort of see them looking around thinking, is this a madhouse I've joined? As everyone is made to shut their eyes and start doing sort of breathing. But actually, it really transforms the level of engagement that you get from that meeting, as people are no longer thinking about the 101 mile an hour thing that they've been working on, and creates a change.
Yeah, because you're recognizing that, there's preparation to go into it to get people ready. We're just assuming because it's hit 4:00, we're all ready. Well, that's just because of an arbitrary point in time. That there's no reflection of what your hour has been like before that 4:00 hits, or my 4, or anybody else in the room. So it's interesting you mentioning about the eyes. I mean, the closing the eyes. So we're about to trial. So what we've noticed, we've got to bore you with some science now for seconds. We've got 5 senses. So smelling, touching, tasting, hearing, seeing. And all of those senses feed information to our brain every millisecond. Roughly 11 million pieces of information every second drawn from those 5 senses. Of those 11 million, 10 are from our eyes. So we're about to try with a football team where the coaches actually don't even enter the dressing room anymore. They just speak over a tonal system to the players, because it transpires that if the really important thing here is for the focal message to get across, why not just, well, guys, why does it limit to that then? Why don't we remove the distraction of what Oliver's hoodies like today? And then in a board meeting, I think there'd make a sense of disengaging the eyes sometimes. What you're doing is closing the eyes, because the eyes are they're wonderful to keep us alive, obviously, to look for danger. But when we're not in a dangerous situation, they're a nightmare for attention. And so you can make a very strong case for part of the board meeting, I think, for like wearing an eye mask.
It's striking, actually, how often you see board members with their heads buried in their board papers or looking up at what's on the slide, and you can see they're not listening to what's being said. They're thinking about what they're going to say next. So I can see a real case for maybe we should have more boards experimenting with blindfolds to ensure that they are fully engaged in the discussion.
But again, going back to that point, if people accept there's a problem, and let's say the problem you think you've mentioned it yourself, like, are they listening? But you have to get people to accept there's a problem first of all. So people do accept, okay, I'm speaking, but Eamon's switched off, or there are all these 3 guys here looking at their phones. So if you boil it down to what is the problem, then the options become more realistic. That makes sense. Well, guys, because people walked into the room and go, why are they all wearing black? Well, we discussed this 3 weeks ago, guys, because people are not listening to what Eamon says. So we need to find a way of helping. So I think that going back to that's critical, I think, to really get people to agree, circle around what's the answer, what's the question we're trying to answer here. I interviewed Clive Woodward a few weeks ago, the ex-rugby English manager, and interestingly, about half-time, but he noticed that his team in the 3rd quarter were dropping performance just before the World Cup. So doing well quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 4, but quarter 3 was like falling off at volume of tackles, speeds, scoring was going down. And he realized what happens before the 3rd quarter, half-time. So he sent everybody away. His 3, including Johnson, some of his leading players, the entire backroom team. 2 days. Guys, you've got 2 days to tell me how you redesign half-time. We've got 900 seconds. How do we completely... And his design was completely ahead of his time. He came back, but funny enough, 3 minutes of silence. And some other things and he got the players to change their clothes at half-time to show that the first half has ended, put to bed, new white kit on, new, English rose. Let's go and have another game in the second half. So the other thing that is interesting, maybe a parallel, or maybe I'm stretching it here, is one of the things we get coaches to do at halftime is eat something. So there's something called ego depletion. I don't know if you've ever come across this concept, ego depletion, which is basically something happens to the brain where if you're driving, you're looking at your left-hand side of the road, but you can see there's traffic on the other side, right? You're looking, rubbernecking, you're kind of listening to a podcast, hands-free is going. So basically what happens is it's so tiring to focus on X when all this other stuff's happening around X. Your brain will have something, basically your glucose levels collapse. And so we realize, so for managers, let's say you're, the Man U manager, and you're down in your hunkers, you're having a tough time, you're trying to ignore the press, try to ignore the cameras, what the guy, what Guardiola's doing next to you, to your right in his dugout, you're trying to focus on the game, and so base sugar levels collapse. So we now give coaches quite a lot of sugary things to eat. And for 2 reasons. One, because they're just hungry, actually. They don't realize it because so much adrenaline. And second thing is they shut up for a while. They're breathing. In order to eat, you have to regulate your own breathing. And so we find it calms them, that literally helps regulate their emotions to an extent. So I wonder, board meetings have more snack times. I don't know, just break it up a little bit.
That's really interesting, because there's lots of research, I can't remember if it was Gladwell or others, who's shown that you never want to be pitching or asking someone for something when they're hungry, because, people suffer from hunger. I guess the sugar in a half-time team talk works because I guess the sugar crash that you get afterwards isn't a problem. Whereas my experience, at least of board meetings, is they're longer than that, and therefore sugar crashes are really unhelpful. Like in our, leadership team meetings, we try to make sure we've always got healthy, nuts fruits, etc., so that you don't get that sugar spike and crash. But the point being that you do have food on hand, so no one is ever in that subconscious stress position.
Yeah, also eating together, right, is a very inclusive thing. When you look at someone that eating, usually quite relaxed. Oddly, assistant coaches, we often tell them to eat an apple, just because the people look less stressed when they eat. It's quite hard to look like in a very stressed environment. If you're not the guy speaking, you can get quite fidgety. So just give me something to do, like eat an apple, or like the evidence shows, it makes that person less distracting to the rest of the room. But you're realizing, Oliver, there are people, we all have fundamental needs, which are all greater than the PowerPoint you're about to present. Like in the if you look at Maslow, I'm a big believer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the 5, like you need rest, you need food, water, you feel safe, and you feel together, not threatened. If you haven't met any of those first 3, then your biggest concern will be, when am I going to eat?
Yeah, you almost need that as a checklist at the start of every board meeting.
Yeah, even the temperature. Like if something's very hot, then that's quite hard to ignore.
It's interesting though, because I think there'll be some board members listening to this who might go, gee, that's interesting. But I reckon there'll be a lot who go, my gosh, Ollie has really gone off his rocker now. He's gone absolutely mad. And there's not that performance mindset in boards. How do elite sports teams foster that mindset? I always remember watching that Amazon documentary where Teta did his light bulb thing. And what was so fascinating to me about that was how badly it crashed and burned, but that he was willing to take those risks. And that there were lots of other things that were just inspirational. But in boards, I don't see or hear much about that sort of level of experimentation.
Looking to lead coaches, when they walk into the room, they have a good look around the room and go, what do these guys need today? Not what do I need to do? What do these players need from me today? What's the best way I can, and similarly for, chief exec or what I need to do to kind of help? Because the company, let's say business has had a very rough 2 quarters, right? It's been a bad run of events. Key customers gone, supply chains challenged. How often does the chair or chief really decide, I'm going to inspire the group today? My purpose today is go in and try to lift these people off the ground. And I've never seen that in a board meeting, actually. Ashamed to say. It's always been for what I call the X's and O's. It's always been about the 16 slide or 60 slide presentation with lots of nice diagrams. But it's very hard to inspire somebody when, one, they're looking at that they themselves are looking at the PowerPoint. It's something which they've may not even created themselves. A lot of it now is created by ChatGPT, and you can tell by the drafting, right? We all know the drafting. You can as a lawyer, you can tell the drafting. And so you're switched off, you go, hang on, that's not Eamon, that's not Oliver's words, that was just, perplexity did that. So again, another barrier to go, well, I'm going to switch off now because I can do it myself at home. So that's why we say to coaches, when you walk in the room, what is best for the players in that moment? Do you need to reorder the tactical formation? Or as their leader, do you need to inspire them or try to inspire them?
That's actually a question I've often asked in boardrooms. I've sort of said, when I felt like the direction of the discussion was not being helpful, I just sort of paused and said, to the CEO, would be the most useful thing for you to get out of the next sort of 2-3 hours? Everyone here is here to help you. And what would be most useful? And it felt to me at the time in these particular situations that they were just on train tracks and doing things because they were, as you say, ticking boxes. And people were engaging with it, but actually it just didn't feel like we were adding any value. But that's quite a difficult thing to do. There are some environments where I'd feel more comfortable doing that than others.
Because generally people, when they're under pressure, we behave a certain way, which usually we start acting from a place of fear. When we start acting from a place of fear, we want to control things involved usually speaking a lot or just like creating lots of slides, which is a version of overspeaking, I think. Having lots of slides is a version of overspeaking. So I'll give you an example of one of my inspirations. So I'm going to try a little halftime talk on you, Oliver, if I may. So I'm going to get you to actually talk with eyes. I'll invite you to shut your eyes, and any listener who wants to do the same. You don't have to, but you're invited to. So, what's your home team? What's your favourite team, Oliver? Who do you support?
Arsenal.
Okay. So you are a Teta. So Arsenal is playing Manchester City. We get to the European Cup final, Champions League final this year in June, whatever it is. You come in at half-time and Man City are up 3-0. So Guardiola's made a huge comeback this season, which is very likely. 3-0 down. You walk in, you give the players a few minutes to relax. You walk in as the head coach, Mikel Arteta. You walk in and no player is speaking. You can't even catch anybody's eye. No one's drinking. There's a really heavy feeling in that dressing room. And you start speaking and say, some of you think this game was lost today. 3-0 down against the reigning English champions. I'll be honest with you, as your head coach, I think we've lost the game. But that's okay. There'll be other European Cup the Champions League finals. Maybe we'll be there, maybe we won't be. But for some reason, this team hasn't turned up today. Maybe even including myself. I'm now looking forward, though, surprisingly, to seeing the second half. Because you're all about to see now how you really behave in a situation where you've hardly got any hope of getting out of. You're in a hole, gentlemen. You know, you're about to decide you slip further into that hole or you start climbing out of it. I can't make that decision for you. I'm making no changes to my first 11 because you all deserve the chance, the right to know who you are as individuals. I look forward to seeing your decision in the second half. I have nothing more to say to you. Good luck. Not saying that those two things will ultimately change a game of sports, but there is research to suggest it stops people from falling mentally further or giving them something to hold on to. Like you're trying to get them to think that, hang on, I'm not the guy who falls further into the hole. I'm the guy who starts climbing out of it. So I think it's an underused, and I really don't see why that can't be used in business.
And as your ctrl-alt-delete speak.
Yeah. That's the moment where we do, guys, today we're not doing PowerPoint. We're not doing results. We know what they are. They're rubbish. We don't need an FD to tell us we're in trouble here. You know, we don't need an installments petition to tell us we've got 4 weeks from death. You're all smart individuals. So, and the analogy you'd maybe use is what people do, like it happens in football and rugby and basketball. When teams are losing a lot, well, I'll ask you a question. What do you think coaches do at halftime when teams are losing a lot?
Good ones or bad ones?
Good question, bad ones.
Talk a lot and berate.
Talk a lot and start dishing out, you did this, you didn't do this. Yeah, basically a very individualized, sometimes illegal, kid you not behavior. Whereas the really good ones realise today's not the day to get them a telling off. We've got to do the opposite today. Because unless the team have a belief of getting a result, what's the point of offloading 9.5 minutes of tactical information to them? And the same thing I think would say of business. What's the point of you with your 12-step, this is our magic plan, 90-day plan to take us from hell to heaven. But people executing that plan presumably need to have some belief that this is going to work here. Is these 12 going to... So I think that there's a preparatory step, a foundation to set. And I think that's the chief exec or the chairperson should to do so.
Yeah, and that ties nicely with actually some research I came across recently from one of the universities looking at essentially negative feedback does very little positive, whereas it's sort of positive feedback that encourages people to keep repeating the things that they're doing well. And the example this person I was listening talk about this said, if I sit there and tell you, look, I really like the way you did 4 projects for us this year. And those 3 that you did, where you did X, Y, and Z, I really like those. And you don't need to say to them, that 4th one you did was terrible, because they'll work that out, they'll read between the lines. But the way you're framing that, it creates that positive energy. And the research was showing that basically it's a waste of your time and theirs to focus much on the negative.
One of the things I've learned from my research, or maybe become a student again doing a PhD, is one of my supervisors, Professor Lyle, a very famous sport coach professor in Leeds Beckett. I did first stage of my PhD. He sent me through 24 questions. No feedback, just questions. But they're drafted in a way which clearly were written in a way which, like, Eamon, you're like not... You just could tell after analysing, he was critiquing, but not in a direct way. It's very clever. And so, and again, going back to coaching, some of the really good coaches just know what questions to ask.
Tell me more about the power of storytelling. You've touched on it already, this idea that less is more. I think the average time of a sort of team talk varies from 6 seconds to 60 seconds. What have you learned about talking and telling stories that a board member listening to this now might learn from to make themselves a better storyteller?
There's something called theming, which happens a lot in sport now, Oliver. So a team will pick a theme for a year. So, for example, it may be mountaineering. But the entire season is about the team as a group getting on the gear, going up and climbing Mount Everest and taking the entire season. That is a very powerful way of having a vehicle for storytelling. And I think businesses could also set a theme for the entire year. Because what a theme does, it then gives you a jumping off point for making speeches and also with a theme, people then can see, well, what's my role in the theme? Like if you do Mount Everest, which I think some teams use, like you go, right, guys, we're not all employees, but we're all mountaineers. No person climbs Mount Everest on their own. I think it's actually literally impossible because of the rope system. And so it's a team. So it kind of binds in you're doing as a team. And then that can run through the entire year. So you can have somebody come in who's climbing Everest, right? As the beginning of a board meeting, just kind of freshen things up a little bit. You can have everybody come in with a pickaxe one day, or just so it becomes fun. People then go off and then maybe research what it's like to climb Mount Everest. I think that's the precursor to good storytelling, having a good theme. And I think there's a way of selling a theme for a business the entire year.
Reminds me a bit of actually Owen Eastwood, who was a past guest, one of my favorite episodes, episode 19, where he talked about the importance of creating a sense of belonging and your role within the organization. And I guess that's exactly what you're doing with that theming. You're allowing people to orientate what their experience back to a shared understanding. Any other tools like that board members wanting to make more of the power of storytelling might be able to learn from you?
Getting the other board members to say, maybe you take one group now, when a team member joins the group, they've got to do 5 things. They've got to do a presentation to the whole group, like where you're from, favorite things from your country, worst dream, best dream, life goals. Takes 5 minutes. That's a great icebreaker. I don't know if you could do that in a board meeting, like where you take turns. And then if you do your 5 minutes, or maybe in some kind of maybe offsite, but just getting an insights to know, because you're not going to get to know the person just by going through the business plan together. You're not going to get to know, it's been very conclusive there. It's probably harder, isn't it, to get to know the person just by looking at a Word document together. Definitely.
I think boards as a rule tend to underinvest in themselves as a team. There was a nice example of actually exactly this in, I think it was episode 46 with Dr. Shafali Yogendra, where she talked about one of the things that they did as a board was talk about their first job, and that threw up all sorts of surprises and unpicked various assumptions that they had made about each other and their backgrounds.
Well, one of our football teams, what they've done now is they write to there's 25 players in the squad. So they've now written to the club where each of those players first started playing football. So it's some under 8 team in Manchester, like they'll write to that club and say, do you remember Oliver Cummings playing in that team? Yes, of course you do. He's now played for England, of course you remember him. Do you have any pictures of him playing? Or is the coach, any coaches hanging around that he... And so we then have a file for each of the players from their first playing days. And then during the year we do what's called Who Am I, where we reveal like a picture of a young boy or young girl of his female team and go, can anyone guess who this is? And obviously if it's you, don't say it's bloody you, because you don't recognize. And then we'd have a quote from so Oliver Cummings was the best, quickest right winger ever in this team I've ever had. And so thinking aloud here, whether or not a chairperson could do something similar for the board of directors, right to their, we all got wonderful LinkedIn profiles now, right to the first school.
Funny enough, Owen Eastwood does this thing called The Story of Us, which we did with an artist, which was incredible, where we got every single person to write their name and where they joined in a timeline in this big piece of art, and the reason they joined and their sort of highlight since they've joined. And it was such a simple thing, but my gosh, was it powerful for creating that sense of identity and shared purpose. And actually I could imagine something like that working really well for a board. Like, why are you here as a board member?
Yeah, the why are you here is, I'm almost being on a retreat, and I think some yoga retreat or some kind of, and a lady will ask, why are we all here? We're also all to get more flexible. And then she goes, that's all rubbish. Let's do it again. And we went around the room again, and we all give on. Then the funny, just real answers then. I'm feeling depressed or whatever. Well, I think I was feeling depressed at the time, but it was interesting. She went around again, and then everyone did give a much better, deeper, let's call them, answers. But it takes bravery to do something different, Oliver, and in terms of you're brave to do things like that. I see from a sporting point of view, getting people more comfortable with each other clearly increases high performance, because then people are more likely, like going back to that player on player feedback. The most high performing programs I've seen is players are sometimes almost fighting each other because they can be honest to each other. They know that having a go at you at half time means that we're still friends. We're going to live beyond this game of football today. But I need to give you a message which is very clear and direct. I'm doing it because I want us to do better, as opposed to just sitting in the corner and just like sniggering or not having to get up and go and doing it. But that requires deep effort.
Well, let's hope we've inspired some listeners today to try some things, and they might share those with us at some point on LinkedIn or otherwise.
I will say, listeners, force to favourites brave.
And time is flying by, but before we go to the lightning round, I'd love to just talk briefly about your own MJ Hudson journey, which sounds like an extraordinary story, where you went from 0 to 300 million and then back to 0, which has echoes of a recent podcast guest, Ali Parser, who built Babylon, which went from 0 to 4.1 billion and back to 0 in episode 101. Can you just talk through that? And I'm particularly interested in the sort of through the eyes of the board. Where was the board adding value on that journey, and where could it have added more value?
MJ Hudson. So I got involved 2011. Matthew Hudson had an idea, which is a good idea, to form a basically law firm focused on private equity. And luckily that market just grew, right? The private markets industry grew. So we had a great team with lots of, really inspiring lawyers. Where it all changed, in my view, is decision to make it a public company. So there was a decision made, which was not Matthew, it was his final decision was to make. And to have it, and I remember at the time thinking, this doesn't feel right. I thought we weren't big enough. I thought we weren't institutionalized enough, to be blunt. We had offers from, I think, 16 private equity firms that they could have money to grow. So there were options to kind of have money to get even bigger. But anyway, the decision was taken. And I think from that moment, we turned the whole business into one number, which is the share price. There was an over-focus then, because then it gives you a reading of the performance, right? Every millisecond. And so you had people, including myself, right, looking at the share price and looking what you have made or not made, and loads of team members had stock options which they lost money in. In my view, that was a critical bad decision. I think that sort of decision is made because when you're a private company, obviously you have much smaller boards and might be less effective. So the biggest decision made, I think, was made before it was a PLC. So I think a decision of that size wouldn't be allowed in a PLC. You'd have proper verification and analysis of it.
It reminds me of a wonderful line I heard from the founder of IKEA, who said going public is like wetting your pants. In the beginning, it feels warm and nice, and then not so good.
I do some teaching at, as you said, Saïd, and I wonder, the number of public companies is decreasing year on year, has done for the last 21 years, I think. In 10 years' time, will you have listed equity markets? I'm not sure you will, maybe even less than that, because you turn it into, you've got a report every 3 months, and that drives certain short-termism, which is unhealthy for a reasonably small business. So it was a bad decision.
With your performance mindset now, you talked about the negative effect of having that single focus on the share price. What would you have done as a board member with the benefit of hindsight to change that within the organization, given that you were a public company and you couldn't change that?
I think then we more focus on, because the business went on basically a buying spree. We all bought lots of, I forget the number of businesses, but we bought maybe 7, 8 businesses, really more than that actually, to different countries. There was too many acquisitions in a short period of time. So the ability for business to bed in wasn't long enough. The other thing I since realized is that when you grow by M&A, it takes a long time to really work out how the business is doing, because you're amending, restating all the time, you're kind of adjusting the account. So it's not, and I'm not particularly financial literate, never was. And so be able to understand where the real position, I think, was difficult. I think in hindsight, there were businesses which we didn't really know how they're performing because we're on to the next acquisition. And so your attention could only be in one place at one time, generally speaking, unless you're a superhuman being. So I think I would say on the quantum of acquisitions, there wasn't enough time for a business to bed in.
That's interesting. I don't think you're alone in that. I just finished reading a wonderful book called Financial Shenanigans by Shillett, which is all about where you get, disasters as a result of a lack of understanding around financials. And one of my key takeaways from it is that, acquisitions are one of the key sources of people losing track of businesses, because it's really difficult, even if you are well-intentioned. But if you've got an executive team that are not well-intentioned, it's easy to disguise stuff. But even when you are well-intentioned, it's hard to, as you say, keep a track of everything. And time has flown by, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to say a short statement and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Yeah, go for it.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
Leading by Alex Ferguson. Why? Because he's very honest in his approach. And he's someone who really had genuine success. And together with Michael Moravitz, his Sequoia Capital, it's a very well written book.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
Directors asking questions just to look clever.
Most valuable board ritual?
Voting.
Favorite quote?
Actually, my mum's, which is just get on with it.
Most significant professional insight?
What you know is who you know.
Worst professional advice you ever received?
Doing something that you're passionate about because you may not be very good at it.
What have you changed your mind about regarding boards over time?
They can be effective, but you need to have the right people on the bus.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
Not put my hand up at stopping too many acquisitions. So what was the second part of it?
What did you learn?
Being more brave, being more persuasive, having the right energy levels, and not going into boardroom tired. If I'd learned that free, I'd not go into boardroom tired. Make sure you go in like batteries full.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I'm not sure I am. I'm more secure in my own skin than I was.
And finally, 3 takeaways listeners should take from this podcast if they remember nothing else.
Check people are ready to listen to you. Think of when your team need to be inspired and how you're going to inspire them. And lastly, careful of those ego depletions and sugar crashes.
And that has been an absolute treat. I've loved speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Great. Thanks, Oliver. Thank you.
Building a non-exec career is hard. For those starting out, boards can be opaque. For more experienced board members, it can be lonely and hard to stay match fit. Having placed almost 4,000 people on boards in the last 5 years, we know what success looks like. It requires time, energy, resilience, information, and connections. New Role Plus, our community of board peers, exists to give you these things, offering you wholesale support as you try to get board roles and become a standout Ned. Find out more at newrole.com/newrole-plus. That's newrole.com/newrole-plus.